Okay, so here I want to go through the information that you need to know in order to be successful with your learning outcomes exam. So learning outcomes exam deals with the um, the learning outcomes that are part of this course. And so it's the closest thing to a comprehensive exam you have in this course. It's worth just as much as the other four exams, major exams that are in here. It's worth 10% of your grade. So it's really worth studying for it. Some of the things that we've talked about that are going to be on this exam, we might have covered way back in August or September, which could be considered kind of a distant memory for you at this point. So first of all, let me just share for a moment the Canvas course. Okay, so here we are in the Canvas course, and in week 14 and 15, that's the last couple of weeks of our course, including the final exam. Note that the final exam itself is actually just exam number 4. It's proctored with Proctorio, but so it deals with topics 19 through 23. So those are the final topics, and that's all the final exam will deal with. But in this week dealing with learning outcomes, that's this exam here. It's also proctored. And what I'm trying to bring up, reason I brought this up is so that you'll see that you've got the learning outcomes study guide too. So that's where we're going to here, is to go look at that. That's what will help you. And it's a pretty simple study guide in this construction safety course. Let me now go and unshare that page so I can stay about, you can download that file. It's a printer friendly file. It's actually only a single page, so it's extremely printer friendly. And so now let me go and share the study guide, and I've got it right here. And so basically on this single page, there are 5 sections on this page. You see the section 1 here dealing with understand the role of OSHA on construction sites. And as you go down here, you'll see there's only basically 5 sections here to deal with. So let me kind of, basically every sentence on this page could be a valuable thing. So just remember that. So just look at this first phrase. It says the primary purpose of an OSHA accident investigation is to identify the conditions that cause the accident, not to assign blame. So this is not a fault-finding mission when you've got an accident investigation. It's a fact-finding mission. You're trying to figure out what actually caused this accident, and ultimately, what could be done to keep that kind of accident from ever happening again. So what OSHA investigators are looking for, what you should be looking for in your company when you're doing your own independent accident investigation, is look for the root causes. Yes, you find the direct causes. Yeah, he fell. And then you look for the indirect causes. Well, he wasn't wearing fall protection. That's an indirect cause. It certainly seems like a pretty direct cause, but we would call that somewhat indirect. Maybe nobody was policing to make sure that they were using it, or maybe nobody was providing it. But what happens then is when you look for root causes, you're looking for management system failures, because ultimately, when you find the root cause of an accident, the fact that they weren't providing it, or they weren't making sure, providing training for fall protection, that sort of thing, those are management system failures that if you can correct those problems, you can keep that kind of accident from ever happening again at that company. And so that's the ultimate goal here. But anyways, I'm getting off topic here, but so this single sentence here is a fairly long one here. It's primary purpose of an accident investigation. You could think about this in terms of, okay, maybe how would I turn that into a test question? And I could ask you instead, what is the primary purpose of an OSHA accident investigation? And yeah, it's to identify the conditions that could cause that accident, or that caused that accident. The next line here, it says there is a real difference between OSHA compliance and industry best practices. Well, we've talked about that a long time ago, but OSHA compliance, when you're in compliance with OSHA standards, if you're following their minimum standards, these are considered the minimum, the least you can do. Whereas industry best practices, sometimes that's all they do is meet those standards. But there are some cases, many cases really, where industry chooses to exceed those standards. Not on everything, but fall protection is a good example, because the most common way to die on a construction site is from falling. And so you get the most bang for your buck as far as time spent if you're spending effort to make sure that people are protected from falling. And so a best practice would be to exceed OSHA standards in an area like that. It'll make the biggest difference on your job site as far as safety goes. Look at the next line. It says OSHA determines compliance, whereas individual company policies determine best practice. Well, that's kind of related to the previous sentence. We're talking still about compliance and best practices. But your best practices have to at least meet OSHA's minimum standard. You could be asked, what is OSHA's mission? Well, it's to ensure a safe and healthy work environment. Their focus is at work, the workplace. And when we say safety and health, there's two sides to the safety coin, really. When we talk about safety, we're talking about protecting people from being physically hurt. When we're talking about health, we're talking about protecting people, workers, from exposure to hazardous substances or any kind of hazardous environment. And so they're both important, but that's why we list safety and health, or sometimes health and safety, depending on the context. But anyways, what's the main purpose of an OSHA citation? Well, that's a legal document, like the speeding ticket you might get for speeding. That's a citation. So it's not. This is what it is used to inform the employer and the employees of the regulations and standards which have been broken when OSHA's come in to do an inspection. So it's just kind of keep all of that in mind. So there may be 5 questions under this category here. So you can kind of see that there's every single word in that paragraph matters. Look at the next group here. It says identifying unsafe acts and unsafe conditions and how they cause construction accidents. So I just mentioned that, the indirect causes of an accident can be things like failing to use fall protection. So that's an unsafe act to not use fall protection, not to have a personal fall arrest system, or to not have guardrails. The thing is that you can have faulty or missing guardrails, so that's an unsafe condition about the job site. If you actually do work without that fall protection, well, that's an action now. So unsafe acts are things that we do or fail to do, and those are our actions, our unsafe acts. That's an indirect cause of an accident, or could be. Whereas an unsafe condition is something about the job site that is dangerous, which we sometimes would call conditions on the ground, unsafe. Sorry, I lost the term. Maybe it's in here, but anyways, so that's what we're dealing with here. So accidents are caused by one of two things, basically unsafe acts and unsafe conditions. So then what I've got next are really examples. So a rough frame window opening on the second floor of a building would be considered an unsafe condition until that window is actually installed. The window itself becomes a sort of guardrail. It will keep you from falling through that opening, at least in most cases. But when you framed it up on a house, whether it's wood frame or steel, if you got a window opening, it's something that you could fall through. And so you can remedy that by putting up a guardrail or guardrails across it. Depending on the size of the opening, though, if, let's say, you remember the top rail of a guardrail is supposed to be 42 inches in height, plus or minus 3 inches, but 42 inches. Well, and then the mid rail then would be at 21 inches. Well, if your bottom sill of the window comes up to about 21 inches or more, you might only need one 2x4 to be going across there at 42 inches to be considered a safe condition now. So anyways, I'm getting a little bit too elaborate here, but anyways, so let me read the sentence again. It says a rough frame window opening on the second floor. Could it be? Yes, it could be considered an unsafe condition until the window unit is installed. And why? Because of the risk of someone falling through this wall opening. Remember, we talk about wall openings and floor openings. Those are bigger than floor holes. A floor hole is something that you could trip on, or maybe your leg could even go through, but a person can't fall through, where the least dimension of that opening is between 1 inch and 12 inches. Once it's 12 inches or more, it is considered a wall opening or a floor opening that you could fall through, where some people could fall through. And of course, if it's much bigger, anybody can fall through. So remember that. So we've got an example here of a different kind of example of an unsafe act or an unsafe condition. So that first thing was an unsafe condition. And when you've got a rough framed opening, that's an unsafe condition. This next statement here, it says working in a 12-foot by 3-foot wide trench that is 100 meters long with type C soil in the trenches, on the trench walls without any sloping or shoring. Well, that would be considered an unsafe act. So it's an unsafe act if you're working in it already. So of course you got to kind of look at the verbs, you got to look at the action, the adjectives here to see that. Or what are we talking about? An unsafe condition or unsafe act. So it's not complicated, but just kind of watch that. The last sentence in here, most construction accidents are caused by multiple factors with a combination of unsafe acts and unsafe conditions. They're usually combined together. So life is messier than simply having one thing, one unsafe condition. A lot of times in accident investigations, they say that several places I've seen these kind of numbers where they say on average in an accident investigation, a formal accident investigation, for fatality particularly, there can be 10 to 27 contributing factors to an accident. And so you might find several things. Okay, the fact that the safety officer wasn't enforcing rules. They were looking the other way. You can go down the list and find, a lot of people to blame. Because usually when an accident actually happens, you can have near misses where things almost go wrong, but don't, because somebody was paying attention, was sharp enough that day to avoid it in some way. Okay, so let's look at the next section. Now we're in the third section of 3 of 5, recognizing the 4 most fatal categories of serious construction accidents and how to prevent them. Remember, we talked about that in our second exam, exam 2, where the second quarter of the course, we were dealing with the fatal 4, the top 4 things that cause fatalities in the construction industry. So OSHA normally requires fall protection, like a safety harness, when working at elevations over 6 feet. So that's the basic rule of fall protection for construction. And because we're focusing on construction, that's the number, the basic number for fall protection you need to remember. So yeah, the top 4 things are falls. Falls are the most common way. That's about more than a third, maybe 35% of the fatalities come from there. Then the next one down, about 10%, we're looking at struck by, something striking you at velocity generally. So struck by hazards. And then there's electrocution is maybe 9%. And then after that, a little bit of a distant 4th one would be caught in or caught between situations. And so that's what we're looking at. The first sentence I had here was about falls. Okay, so there it is. The next one, let's see, it is never safe to walk or work under a load, even if you're wearing the right PPE, such as steel toes and a hard hat. That's not going to protect you if something drops from a crane above you. That can strike you. So that would be an example of a struck by. Let's see, the next one, never jump off moving heavy equipment or cut around behind it, even if it's moving slowly. So even slowly moving equipment you might get caught behind or caught between or caught under. Bad place to stop to tie your shoe would be behind a piece of heavy equipment where the engine is running. You can back up anytime when you got an operator in the booth. And then electrocution was the other one we had. So the most severe electrical burn is likely to be internal. So what appears to be a small surface wound could indicate very serious burn. So that's basically a description of an electrical burn, which is a category of the different kinds of burns you can get from electrical charges. And that's maybe the worst one, a gruesome one, because you're cooking meat, cooking bone marrow while you're being electrocuted by, when it's not low voltage, it would have to be a significant voltage, higher voltage for this. But anyways, yeah, so those are things that I'll be asking about, the top fatal 4 things, and these are all kind of related to this. Remember, in the first exam, the last topic in the first exam was on HAZCOM, hazardous communication, or health hazard in construction, health hazards. And within that chapter, we talked about the safety data sheet, or the SDS. So you need to remember that abbreviation. The SDS, that stands for Safety Data Sheet. That's a formal document, the official document for every dangerous substance you're supposed to have a copy of right on your job site. And we used to call it an MSDS instead of an SDS, because we used to call it a material safety data sheet. So we just dropped the word material. It's still SDS. We still have that portion, but that may throw some people. So you just remember that relationship if it helps. But we now, since 2016, and it was being phased in between 2016 and 2019 and 2017, somewhere in there. I think it was pretty much completely phased in by 2019. But so it's been in place for a while now. But safety data sheets, you're supposed to have a binder of these things. All the hazardous substances on your job site have to be in that binder, each of those documents, so safety data sheets. They are created by the manufacturer of the chemical or whatever the hazardous substance is. Even if you got something like pressure treated lumber, you've got a document for that. It's supposed to be included with every shipment of this stuff, so you collect them. And then in a lot of companies, they'll subscribe to a service that keeps them up to date with this. And it doesn't have to be a binder. It can also be a terminal. Nowadays in the plants, they'll often mount a terminal in places. But what happens is your company has to provide them and make sure everybody on the job site, all their employees know where this is and understand that they have a right to go read that binder anytime they want. It's always available to them. So you have to make sure everybody knows where they're at and make sure they understand it's available to them to read. So let's see. The first sentence, it says a safety data sheet, formerly called an MSDS, will tell you what personal protective equipment is required. So that's one basic thing. That's just one of many things that are there, but I want you to know where you find that. So let me see. When using a hazardous material, well, that's going to be in section 8. I might have an older version of this somewhere. I don't know. I'll have to double check. I'll double check on that. So section 8. So I think it's important that you know that. Yeah, let me go and download that right now. The fastest way for me to do that is to bring it to downloads. I'm going to unshare this screen for a moment and bring up a different version. Let me close this one. I'm getting there. Let's see. There we go. It's maybe got a little bit of different format in here. Okay, I'm going to share that page now. Thank you for bearing with me. Okay, so here we are. It's the same document. I guess I put some more boldface in there. That helps a little bit. Oh, and numbers. Yeah, that's useful. Yeah, so I definitely went to an older version here. Okay, so yeah, so in section 4, finding information within a safety data sheet to identify. Okay, so yes, section 8. So the safety data sheet, I just saw it in class the other day, so that's why I kind of remembered that. So yeah, you need to know that number. Section 8 could be turned into a test question near you. But again, I think it's important that when you got this document that you know how to go directly to the section where where the most common things you're going to want in an emergency are at. You're going to need to know what kind of PPE to have to wear, whether you need to wear a respirator, what kind of respirator, those kinds of things. That'll be in section 8 of the standard safety data sheet. And ever since 2016, this new safety data sheet format will have all the common sections in this order. So that's why you need that. And the next, okay, the next sentence, it says an SDS must be available on site for all chemicals and available to all workers. Well, I just mentioned that, but here it is in writing. And then the next sentence here, it says a safety data sheet describes what? It describes the substance. It describes the hazards. It describes the safe handling and the first aid in section 4. So I think the key words, remember, okay, first aid, where do you go to look for first aid information? That's going to be in section 4. So you got 2 sections that you need to know, section 8 and section 4. And even emergency spill procedures will be there. So it's an emergency section. It's a critical area in a case of emergency to remember section 4. In the last sentence, it says that all materials on a construction site, all hazardous materials, they have any hazards, must be labeled or tagged or marked with the name of the material. So you can't have a mystery jar or bottle or container of a flammable gas or something. It's got, or toxic liquid or something. It's got to be labeled. You can't have an unmarked container, a Solo cup full of gasoline or something. It's got to be labeled so that there's no confusion. And the last section, maybe the little bit trickier section, it's not that tricky, but it deals with some of the stuff that I've talked about some of these things earlier, kind of on purpose at the beginning of this course. So some of these things in section 5 will be familiar to you, but the main area we're going to deal with a lot of these topics in section 5 is topic number 23 coming up. We've only got a couple of topics left, 22 and 23, and this is kind of based mostly on that. But I covered this stuff in the first week of class and even a few other times along the way. So let's look at it again. Let me get to the headline. It says, understanding the role of project management in coordinating safety on construction sites. You know, the real reason we have this safety course within construction management in our construction management degree is because you, as being part of management, have an obligation to protect the people who work under you, people that work for you, the people that you are managing in any way, shape, or form. And so, you know, this is very important responsibility that you have. And yet you are also an employee, so you have these rights, but you have these obligations. So the first sentence, I know I've mentioned it a long time ago, but so that's a good reason to mention it again here. And it'll be coming up for exam number 4 for a final exam too. But first sentence, if one worker is killed on your job site or one worker is admitted to a hospital, again, for a work-related incident, you must notify OSHA within 8 hours of knowing about the fatality and within 24 hours of knowing of the hospitalization. So you got 8 hours to contact OSHA. If there's a fatality on your job site, you've got 24 hours to contact OSHA if there's a hospitalization. Now, we don't mean just going to the emergency room to get checked out. Diagnostic procedures are fine to do, and they do not imply that it has to be considered an event like this. But you don't just, you know, plug your ears and close your eyes and pretend nothing's happened. You take them to the hospital. You have them sent to the hospital just in case. But if they are admitted as an inpatient of the hospital, that's what this category means. Now, this used to be that you had to have 3 people hospitalized before you had to contact OSHA. That rule changed in 2015. But so that's a fundamental thing. And there's numbers involved. So remember, these are the tougher questions, even though they're pretty simple. In the heat of battle of a test, you're going to say, okay, which was it? 8 hours, 24. What was the numbers here? And anytime there's numbers involved with any of these facts on this page, like, section 8 that I mentioned up here in the previous section, or section 4, you need to know those numbers. You need to spend a little quality time remembering them ahead of time before you take this test. Okay, so that was a longer sentence, a couple of lines involved. Okay, in the next sentence, in case of an emergency, such as the fatality or catastrophe listed above, we call fatality, of course, we know that, but a catastrophe is often a term we'll use when somebody has to be hospitalized. It can also be part of, horrible accident where there's major property damage, but still catastrophe is a more general topic. But anyways, if somebody has to be hospitalized, where the worker is killed or hospitalized, you must contact OSHA by calling this phone number. So you need to know this phone number, 1-800-321-OSHA. 1-800-321-OSHA. So whatever OSHA stands for with the numbers on your dial, you had to go look at that, but that's how it's easy to remember it. You're counting down. Okay, but generally OSHA wants you to know that number so that you're not having to Google it or look it up in the middle of an emergency. If you do not call OSHA, that's still related to this question up here in some ways, but If you do not call them, that's an automatic fine, and they'll be kind of they'll have their nose bent at a joint when they arrived, because they want to do their CSI style investigation when they arrive, and so you got to preserve evidence and call them in a timely fashion so they can get there and investigate and ask questions of witnesses. And you don't want it to be the state police who end up calling them, because then, you want to make that your second phone call, basically, or third phone call. Okay, so here's something that I talked about way back at the beginning of this course, but you might not remember it. We have OSHA record keeping requirements, and that's what we're about to get to with topic 23. But companies with more than 10 employees at any time during the previous calendar year or the current calendar year are required to keep written OSHA illness and injury records, and to provide these requested records when OSHA requests them within 4 hours of their request. For most documents, they'll give you only 4 hours, and they start to wonder if it takes you the whole 4 hours to get them to them. What are you photoshopping? Eh? So that their definition of a small business is 10 employees or less. Now remember, and I mentioned this a long time ago too, was they count as your employees anyone who is under your company's control. So that means, some contractors think, oh, we'll keep under 10 employees all the time, so we don't have to worry about that problem. But then they'll hire temp agency workers. Those are considered under your control. They are your employees, regardless of how you're paying them in some third-party fashion. But it also includes subcontractors that are working for your company, because they are under your company's control also. So a subcontractor could have a bunch of employees. And so many companies think that they don't need to worry about records until they've had a serious accident and suddenly, or an OSHA investigation in some fashion where that comes up, and suddenly they're in big trouble. So remember that 10 employee threshold, if you ramped up even for a weekend to a lot more people, then that counts. It's any period of time. So it's a broader brush than people realize. The next statement here, we're coming near the end here. Part of your role as a construction manager will involve keeping best practices of safety in mind as you estimate, as you plan, and as you schedule your projects. So remember, in construction management, that's what we do. You got to bid a job, you got to then do some planning. They kind of do some together there, but planning is often done in great detail after you've won the award of the job. And then you've got a planning and scheduling. So planning and scheduling, we have a course on planning and scheduling. We have 2 courses on estimating. If you don't know what it takes to safely do a job as you're bidding the job for your estimate, you're likely to underbid the job. And then you'll be tempted to try to get away without doing the job properly with scaffolding. Scaffolding costs money. And if you thought you could do it off of ladders because you didn't have enough experience or wisdom, or didn't ask somebody that knew better as you were bidding the job, you can end up running into trouble. And so part of what you are learning in construction management is what it takes to do a job safely here in this course, so that when you're bidding a job, you say, well, there's no way you can do that. OSHA won't allow it. You can't do that job off of pogo sticks or ladders. You're going to have real scaffolding built. And so you better plan for it and have a contract ready, and part of your bid to make sure a scaffold building company is setting it up, or if you've got the expertise that's being done, or the training or whatever is necessary, you got to think part of the planning and scheduling is making sure that there's some training that needs to be done before a particularly dangerous part of the job, that you're scheduling that training in a timely fashion just before it comes up, so employees are ready for it. And the last sentence here on this whole page is the last one. It says, even if employees are not following OSHA and company safety regulations, it is still the responsibility of the employer. The employer's responsibility to protect employees from harm. Meaning, just remember that, and I've said this before, but OSHA never issues citation to employees, only to companies. So employees can get fired, but they don't get OSHA citations. Now, if they did something willful, it could become a criminal matter, maybe or even a legal matter for a lawsuit, possibly. That's a whole different legal matter. But from the standpoint of OSHA is concerned, I mean, they don't issue citations to people, only to employers. So yes, employees can do the wrong thing sometimes, regardless of what you do, but you're supposed to be policing and watching them, oversight, and watching for that. And it's still the employer's responsibility, no matter whose fault it is within the company. Okay. Now, so this is one-page event here on this one. This, if you're in my materials and methods class, well, you know that it's multiple pages in a PowerPoint presentation, basically, that I put up there. But here, it's just this one page. And so I can always tell who has spent some time studying or at least listening to this video, because you either do very well on this test and it ends up boosting your grade, or you do horribly because you never even, what do you mean study guide? Never paid attention to that issue, or never focused on it, or looked at any of my instructions. But so you'll either do very well or very poorly. It's almost no in between on this thing. It's not a hard test, but it's worth a lot. So it's really worth doing, of course, and doing it well. And so make sure you spend some quality time looking at this page, even after viewing this recording. But yeah, I guess I do have a better formatting up top. It's the same stuff, but it's just bold-faced better to emphasize things. So it's worth looking at that. That's what's posted up there in Canvas already. In week 14, just above that learning outcomes exam. So the learning outcomes exam is open and ready for you to go to. So you better get to it. It closes next Monday, so you want to make sure you get to it. Okay, so what we've got left in this course, I'm going to go through topic 22 and 23. Those are the last two topics here we've got. So when we get that done, we'll be done with this course, and you'll have your final exam will open up during the Thursday of our last week of class. So it opens up early, but it also closes on the Thursday during final exam week. So December 8th, everything within this course, Thursday, December 8th, everything within this course has to be completed. So I haven't had as many hard deadlines as in this semester as past, but that's a hard deadline because I need to submit my information, and I have a little bit earlier deadline because I've got some other responsibilities to take care of too. But this is probably one of the ones you're going to want to get out of the way first, because it's, this course is not too complicated as courses go. And remember, you still have there's some people that have already submitted this, but most people haven't yet. You still have your safety presentation video to submit, and that's due this coming Monday. So you want to make sure you spend some time doing that during your break here. Okay, so with that, let me unshare and we'll call it a day. So I will deal with the last two topics next week.